pccaht.org, or pcat.org as we call it. And that coalition is valuable to localized victim response, as well as prevention programs, because human trafficking is absolutely preventable. We also advocate on a legislative level. Change begins with sound policy. So what we do is we advocate for stronger anti-human trafficking legislation on a state and federal level. And we also introduce fair trade products into the local markets. The more people who demand fair trade products, the less human trafficking will occur globally, because how we spend our money matters. If consumers demand that products are made with ethical business practices, then companies follow suit. So that is the idea behind fair trade. We also put our money where our mouth is. When we say we introduce fair trade products into the local market, we actually do sell fair trade. And that is also a way that we fund our programs. We are a nonprofit, so our fair trade programming is really important on so many levels. So if you wanted to visit fairtradersproject.org and learn more about that, you're free to. And in our follow-up emails, we'll have that information available for you to visit that website. And with that being said, so those are our 4 action items. And now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today, Pam Strickland. She is the founder of NC Stop Human Trafficking. NC Stop Human Trafficking was founded 10 years ago. Well, a little bit longer, but we incorporated 10 years ago. And we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We're very excited about that. We became a membership organization just this year, and we'll have more information for you about that as well. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Pam Strickland. And throughout this presentation, just as a reminder, if you have a question, put it in the chat box, and we'll be pausing periodically to get those questions answered for you. And please don't forget to take the pre-survey, and at the end of this presentation, we'll offer you the link to the post-survey. It's very important for us to collect this information for funding purposes. So thank you so much for your time. And now, without further ado, Pam Strickland.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to have so many of you with us today. I'm Pam Strickland, the founder of this organization, and I'm excited that you are interested in learning more about pornography and how it's related to sex trafficking. Pornography is a victimless crime. How many of you have heard that? How many of you have believed that? If only it were true, we wouldn't have to talk about it today. The victims that we're going to discuss today are the so-called performers in adult films. Let's be clear that today's porn is far different from what was considered pornographic when I was a kid. Back then, a nude woman in a magazine was a big deal. Virtually the only way a child might encounter pornography was to find dad or older brother's Playboy magazine. To see a pornographic video, you had to enter an adult video store or have it sent to your home, and both of those were very risky. You might be seen. Today's porn is violent and degrading and includes group and deviant sex. And today, we all carry a porn delivery system with us 24/7. That easy accessibility is the key to the increase in pornography use and addiction. 81% of people in the US accessing Pornhub, which is the largest porn site in the world, do so with their phones, 12% with their desktop, and 7% on a tablet. All of that's interesting, but how is it related to sex trafficking? Here's a quote that I love. Prostitution is the main act. Porn is the dress rehearsal. I have to qualify that by saying that here at North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking, we believe that almost all acts that are labeled as prostitution are actually sex trafficking. So what exactly is sex trafficking? This definition comes from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, which was a federal statute. The recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person performing the act is under the age of 18. So I want to be really clear here that when we're talking about sex trafficking, age really matters. If someone is under the age of 18 and they're being used for a commercial sex act, that child is considered a victim of trafficking. No further criteria must be met. You do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion if the person is under 18. So producing pornography is obviously a commercial sex act, as the whole purpose of creating porn is to make money. Pornography is a big business, and we'll talk more about that. From this definition that I just gave you, we immediately understand that any commercial sexual images of children under 18 automatically meet the definition of sex trafficking. So in looking at this definition, we see that if a person is defrauded, coerced, or forced into making pornographic images, that person is a victim of sex trafficking. So that is the first example of how pornography is related to sex trafficking. Many of the so-called actors in pornographic videos are actually victims of sex trafficking. These are signs, pictures and signs from a demonstration outside the Pornhub headquarters in Canada, and you can see that they are calling Pornhub a pimp. You can see, and just to clarify here, the corporation that owns Pornhub is called MindGeek. So that's why in one of the posters it says MindGeek executives are traffickers. So these folks understand very well that pornography and sex trafficking are one. So what I wanted to do is share with you the experience of someone who was in the porn industry. And this is an adult. And part of the quote is here on the screen for you, and I'm going to read you a little bit more detail. Jan says, "Of course I lied to my fans. I led them to believe I lived a fantasy life, which was far from the truth. I fed into their fantasies. I said I wanted sex 24/7 and made it seem like I absolutely loved what I did and was happy living this life. I gave them hope and insight into their relationships by telling them what to do. I started to feel like an important nobody. They knew Elizabeth, the porn star, but they would never care to know Jan, the real me. I had to do whatever the producer pleased, and I had to accept it or else no pay. Sometimes you would get to a gig and the producer would change what the scene was supposed to be to something more intense. And again, if you didn't like it, too bad. You did it or no pay." If the porn industry is that hard on an adult, can you imagine what it's like for a child? I'm going to read you an excerpt from the story of Jewel Baraka, who was 14 when she was first trafficked in porn. She says, "Minors in pornography is not a separate issue from the adult porn industry. There have always been teen girls and boys in the adult porn industry. I was one of those. I was 14 when I was trafficked in porn. These shoots where crimes are perpetrated against teenage girls don't happen in the light of day on public sets. My shoots all happened at night, but it was the adult porn industry. I was surrounded by people at least twice my age, both men and women. This means that every adult on that set was complicit in the crimes perpetrated against me. I was not filmed in a pedophile's darkened apartment alone. I was filmed on a set full of cameras, crew, and, quote, performers. I call them performers so that you will understand who I mean. But you should know that all of it was real. The sex, the violence, the torture, and the fear and pain in my eyes and in my screams were 100% real. And we know that where there is demand, traffickers, exploiters, and pornographies will create the supply by any means necessary. I was caught in the middle of that cold system of supply and demand as a 14-year-old. And the brutality of those 3 years being trafficked in porn nearly killed me. And lastly, I'm going to share another story from someone who was trafficked in pornography. This is Jessa. And I'm going to share a video with you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for just a moment so I can make an adjustment so that hopefully you can hear it better.
Okay, you nervous?
A little. My name is Jessa Delacris. I'm originally from Canada, and I never say A. A.
You did it! So, we could get into your story now.
Cool. So I was born into a family that was not a safe family. It started with sexual abuse, and then it turned into then child pornography, and then that was when the sex trafficking started. I was told that all I was good for was to be a little prostitute. My nickname was Little P. Even as an adult, I also had pornography taken, was being trafficked as an adult. I think one of the hardest things for me to just process is sorry. So like being in a cage and being on sets and having to do things that I can't even believe I did, but having guns pointed at me and people telling me that if I didn't keep doing what they told me to do, that I would be shot. I was being raped, but I had a smile on my face. I had to act like I enjoyed it. And I can say that child pornography as well as adult pornography is directly tied to human trafficking. I didn't escape until I was 21, so this continued until basically just before I escaped. I think it was in 2010, I received notification that my pornography was found on the internet. And talking to my investigators, talking to my officers and detectives, just finding the listings where they were finding that, and then finding out that the IP addresses were changing, and realizing that even though I am physically free, my imaging is still being sold, and in many ways, even when I let my mind go there, I feel like I'm being raped and exploited still, because they're still making money off of my pain and my trauma and my humiliation. I still get scared that some of my individuals who have viewed my pornography will recognize me, but as the years have gone on, that's gotten less and less, and I feel like I can walk around with much more confidence, and that does not need to define who I am today. So John was a huge part in teaching me what real love was supposed to be and is, and it's possible to experience real love. My goal is to help people who have been through horrific stuff and are wanting to take steps into this big world that they are starting to engage with for the first time. Some of the things that I've learned about love is it is kind, it is compassionate, it's caring. It's just pretty amazing, like how relationships can hurt you, but also how relationships can heal you.
So you could hear the pain in her voice and understand, hopefully, the trauma that she continued to go through for quite a while, even after the actual physical abuse started, that she knew that those images were still out there. As she discussed, having a gun pointed at her head and being in a cage, you can understand the unbelievable amount of trauma that is inflicted upon both children and adults. But when we're talking about minors, especially traumatic, the acts of violence that they're forced to endure as a part of creating these child sexual abuse images. Note that I don't call it child pornography, and I don't call it, heaven forbid, kiddie porn. That sounds like a cartoon, doesn't it? I'm asking you to help me change the way society refers to this industry. We need to call them what they are: child sexual abuse images. That's the new vocabulary. And as I mentioned, the trauma doesn't end when the act itself ends. That child lives with the knowledge that the most horrific moments in their life, when they're being raped and forced to commit sex acts, have been recorded and captured for eternity on film. For the rest of their lives, they could be recognized on the street by someone who has seen those images. There's a documentary about this very issue. It's called Not Just Pictures, and I highly recommend it. I am going to pause for just a moment to ask Melinda if there are any questions before we move on.
There is one question, and that is, how many of these perpetrators are actually caught and prosecuted?
Well, interestingly, assuming you're talking about perpetrators of the production of child sexual abuse images, those are the only types of pornographic images that are ever prosecuted. If it involves anyone 18 or over, no charges are ever filed. That's not being enforced at all. To say what percentage, though, are actually caught would be pretty hard. I will say that there are multiple task forces in the federal government that are working pretty hard to discover these. They tend to be chains, sort of, organized crime almost, where they're linked to people all over the world. And the way you get into these organizations is by sharing images of children being assaulted, and that's how you gain access to other people's images. It's this image sharing system. So usually once they catch one person, once they get a hint or a tip about one person, then that usually results in multiple people being arrested. I will say, though, that thankfully the sentences are usually quite severe for both possession and production of child sexual abuse images. Other questions, Melinda?
Yes, there is one more. Why do you think it is so difficult for viewers of pornography to understand that women truly don't enjoy or take pleasure in what is happening to them as victims of sex trafficking enough to stop viewing the images?
Ooh, isn't that a loaded question? As Jessa just said, as she told her story, she said, I was being raped, but I was smiling. So part of it is that they are required, much like victims of so-called normal sex trafficking, they're required to act as though they're enjoying it, so that the people who are watching the porn can let themselves believe that in fact that's the truth. So that's a big part of it. I think I'll leave it at that. I will let you know that we will be doing another webinar in a few weeks called How Does Pornography Cause Harm? And we're going to talk about harm to individuals, including the people who are actually consuming the porn, and talk about addiction some, harm to relationships, and harm to society. So we'll go into that a little bit more at that time. So we are going to move on. So we just discussed, or really I allowed the victims to discuss how the so-called actors in pornographic videos are actually victims of sex trafficking. And now we're going to move on to how pornographic videos and images are used to train victims or to show victims what sex buyers want and expect. So 47% of prostituted women in a global survey said that they had been harmed by men who had either forced or tried to force their victims to do things the men had seen in porn. I'm going to read you several other quotes from various studies, and I'm not going to read out the names of the studies. What I'm going to do in our follow-up email to this webinar, I'm going to send you a bibliography that lists all the sources that we used in the making of this webinar. Pimps and traffickers use pornography to initiate their victims. They initiate them into their new life of sexual slavery. Through exposure to porn, these victims get hardened to accept the inevitable and learn what is expected of them. When these customers show up, many come ready with porn images in hand to show the women they're exploiting, many of which are human trafficking victims controlled by pimps, what it is they'll be forced to do. One man explained the impact of pornography on his sexual behavior generally. The more I've watched pornography, the more specific my wants have become. Watching pornography has shaped my sexual desires. I watch pornography and I discover, hey, that really turns me on, and I want to recreate what I've seen in porn. So what I'd like to do now is to share a story, again, by someone who has lived experience in this industry.
Are you ready?
Ready? We're going to sing. Come on. My name is Lexi. I'm from Nashville, and I am a dog mom. I love hanging out with my friends and helping people overcome the things that they've been through in life and not let it define them. The first time I was molested was as a toddler. The first time I was raped, I was 6. The first time I was sold, I was 11. After that first experience of being sold, he kind of gave me a hug and he said, "You're going to make me so much money." And I didn't know what that meant. I just kind of went back over to my grandparents' house. And then he invited me over a different day. They had a camera set up, and basically him and his friend essentially gang raped me for probably an hour and filmed the whole thing. And the fact that there is video out there somewhere of me and being raped, and I don't know how that's been cut and edited to look and appear a certain way. The thing that went through my mind was, are people going to see this? Is my family going to see this? And the people I care about the most, it always felt like a possibility in the back of my mind. Anytime I was over at that guy's house being raped, I could literally look out the window and see my grandmother's house and how close I was to being safe, and would always hope that somebody would come looking for me. And they just never did, because I don't think anyone fathomed something like that happening literally right next door or within your own family. So right before any time a customer was brought into the room, I would be shown pornography. And being that young, I think it translated for me as an overall thing, as a woman, this is what men expect from me, and this is what people want from you. That went on for about 2 or 3 years, and just kind of ended because I hit puberty. And it was actually the last summer of it happening was the most violent, because a lot of the men were a pedophile clientele. It was a whole nother level to experience rejection from people that were abusing me. So it's I'm not even good enough for these people that literally don't care at all. One of the key things that helped me in walking away was forgiveness, and just to kind of take that control back and choose to just let go of it. It's really freeing. I no longer believe that my purpose is to be a commodity for men at all. The way I see my purpose now is for others and to help other people overcome the stuff that's happened to them. Things now are amazing. I'm more free than I ever thought that I would be. Gosh, I never even thought I'd be married. I never thought anybody would want me after everything that I had been through. My husband and I have a great time together, and not that it's perfect, we definitely fight, but we choose each other, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. I'm really happy right now, and I'm not just happy, but I feel like I have true joy.
So hopefully you caught in her discussion about her own experience that her trafficker actually showed her porn before the sex buyer came over, so that she would know what to expect, what to do. That pornography was actually made of her, and that she, like Jessa, was concerned that people are out, those images are out there and people are able to watch and profit from these images of her being raped as a child. So, so hopefully that kind of helps you understand that these images are actually being used to train victims and to show victims what the sex buyers want and expect. So our third way that sex trafficking is related to pornography is that the consumption of pornography actually contributes to demand for sex trafficking. And again, the sources for these quotes will be in the bibliography that you'll receive. Frequent sex buyers use pornography much more often than men who don't buy sex. In fact, men who go to prostitutes are twice as likely to have watched a porn film in the last year compared to the general population. Pornography makes prostitution and sexually exploiting others look normal. There's a strong association between pornography use and going to prostitutes. These studies show a correlation between pornography and consumption of purchasing sex. Why is that? Imagine that a man has been watching porn and decides he wants to try some of the acts portrayed, as we heard in an earlier quote from a sex buyer. Remember, many of the sex acts in porn are degrading and violent. His partner may not be willing to engage in those sex acts, so he may choose to pay for sex from someone who doesn't have the freedom to say no. I want to acknowledge that when I refer to porn users, I'll often use the word he. We all know that females consume porn too, but the overwhelming majority are male. I often refer to the performers as she. Research indicates that both male and female porn performers experience harm. The females experience more physical harm and are more likely to acknowledge it. Watching pornography normalizes the objectification of people. As you watch more and more videos of women being treated like objects that exist solely to please a man, the more you accept that concept as normal. And once you normalize that the women portrayed are objects, buying their bodies becomes more palatable. So just to review this last section that we talked about, many of the so-called actors are actually victims of sex trafficking. The pornographic images are used to train victims or to show victims what sex buyers want and expect. And according to multiple studies, porn consumption contributes to demand. Are there any questions before we move on to our next section, Melinda?
There is one question. Somebody wondered how many years of counseling would it possibly take to get to a point of recovery like the woman in the last video?
That's a really good question. And let me first acknowledge that I am not a therapist or counselor. I imagine that it would be very much dependent upon the individual and their level of resilience, the level of support that they have while they're going through that counseling, whether it be from an intimate partner or friends or family that are supporting them as they're going through that. It may also depend on how long the trauma, the abuse went on. So I feel sure there are multiple factors that play into to how long that might take. Do we have other questions?
That is it for now.
Okay. We will move on then. So I mentioned earlier that sex trafficking is a business. I said we would talk more about that. So pornography is just one of the business models of sex trafficking. We know that porn is a global estimated $97 billion industry, with about 12 billion of that coming from the US. And just to kind of put that in perspective, we've put on here some other large businesses in the US. You see it's about the same as the amount of money generated by the NFL in a year. So we know how people make money from sex trafficking. They force, defraud, or coerce people into commercial sex acts, and then they keep the money. We talked about that when we looked at the definition. So how exactly do people make money from porn? A lot of porn is actually free to access. So why is that? So of course they can make money from ads. There are ads all over pornography sites. And then they have a similarity to another, some people would say vice, that people can get addicted to, which is just like a drug dealer. The porn site will give you some product for free. And then if you want something stronger, you have to pay for it. So I'm sure we have all heard of drug dealers who will give, especially young people, they might give them free pot. And then once they really begin to like it, well, then they start charging them for it, or, other drugs that are stronger. So that's what the porn industry does as well. They'll give you some porn for free, but then if you want something stronger and you want it often, then you're probably going to have to join. You're probably going to have to pay for a membership. So that's one way they make money. And a newer way for them to make money is to have your customers make the porn for you. So that's why I have this slide pulled up. You'll see that the very first, the top search for 2019 on Pornhub was amateur. So amateur porn. And so what this is regular people who aren't on a movie film set, as was described by some of our victims that we heard earlier, but just regular people who record other people or themselves engaging in sex acts and upload it to Pornhub. So you can film a sexual act, upload it, and depending on how many clicks you have over a certain amount of time, you can make money. And of course, Pornhub keeps a good percent of the money for themselves. So what would actually prevent, here's an actual article on how to make money on Pornhub. So what would prevent a trafficker from filming his victim engaging in a commercial sex act and loading it to Pornhub? Nothing. Can you imagine how lucrative that would be? Especially if a trafficker has multiple victims. Aside from the money that they make by selling sex to buyers and then keeping that money, they can also make money from filming the acts and selling them online. Another revenue stream for our friendly trafficker. What is there to prevent an angry husband or boyfriend or ex-husband or boyfriend from posting videos to embarrass their wife or girlfriend? Revenge porn has become a huge problem, which is why it's never a good idea to allow yourself to be filmed having sex. There is some good news though. You can help reduce porn consumption. There are several ways we can do this, And the first way is to educate people about the relationship of pornography to sex trafficking and the harm it causes. So this might help the person who had the question earlier. So when we talk about educating people about pornography, the first group that we need to educate are our young people. And so here on this slide are a couple of different resources for that to help you talk to your kids or grandkids. So these two books that are pictured, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Jr., are books that are designed for a parent or grandparent to read with young children. And it introduces the idea of pornography in an age-appropriate way so that you can begin a discussion. Now, some of you might be thinking, I am not going to start talking about pornography with my kids at an age where I'm reading them books. Well, you might want to think about it. Depending upon which research you read, children are experiencing pornography for the first time at age 11, or I'm hearing more often now, age 9. And many times they are not looking for it on purpose. They come across it by accident, or an older child shows it to them. And so what we need to do as parents and grandparents is prepare children for what to do when, and note I say when, not if, when they first are exposed to pornography. So these are two great tools. The one at the top here, Culture Reframed, is a fantastic website. And for those of us who are scared or nervous about the idea and are thinking, well, what would I say? How do I bring it up? They have actual, talking points and suggestions for situations to bring it up, targeted to different age groups. So this is a really, really terrific resource to help you determine how to talk to your kids about pornography. Another thing that we can consider is, pornography has become so easily accessible and such a part of our culture today that sometimes it just gets brought up in conversation as though it's normal and accepted. And for those of us who believe otherwise, who understand that it's related to sex trafficking and that it can cause harm, what we can do is introduce the idea into the conversation that it's not okay. Not in a judgmental way, not in an adversarial way, but, you could say something like, hey, I just watched a webinar that explained that pornography is actually related to sex trafficking. And, some of those performers, so-called performers, aren't performers at all. They're actually being forced to do it, so that you can begin to educate people that you know. If you're looking for a broader way to educate people, you might want to follow a group online called Fight the New Drug. You can also follow our nonprofit online, of course, NC Stop Human Trafficking. We very often post information about pornography, but this group, Fight the New Drug, that is their complete emphasis, is educating people about pornography. And so this would be a way that you can educate your circle by, sharing the posts that they have. They'll have stories from people who were exploited in the porn industry. They will have stories from people who have been addicted to porn and talk about the harm it caused them and relationships and how they got out of it. I highly recommend this organization, Fight the New Drug. Something else that you might consider doing is joining our organization, because we very much are in the business of educating people about pornography. So we would love to have you join and become a member and help us continue to educate the public about the issue of how porn is related to sex trafficking. So after we educate people, another way that we can help reduce consumption of pornography is to reduce access to porn, especially of minors. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we do that. You know, I already mentioned to you that when I was a kid, if somebody found a Playboy magazine, that was a big deal, right? And now you see the picture here on the right, all of our kids, every one of us and most of our kids are carrying around a porn delivery system. And so we as parents have to regulate that as much as possible. We need to educate them, as we just talked about, but you know, some children who are getting these phones are too young to be expected to regulate it for themselves. And so one of the things that you can do as a parent is contact your internet service provider and tell them that you want porn filtered out. The good thing about that is that it'll filter it out of, you know, all the devices that are on your account. So, you know, if it's your home, any laptops, any phones, tablets, anything that's associated with your account that's receiving internet service through that one account, it will be filtered out. So that's one way that you can protect your children. Something that you may also want to consider if you're looking at it as a more broad issue is obviously your children aren't always with you using your internet. And so you might want to find out, you know, at the school that your child goes to, at the library in your community, has the internet service provider, are they filtering out pornography so that children can't access it at the library and at school? So that's something that you can do to protect your child and others, is check into that. If your town or city has public internet, and many do, you know, when you're in downtown Greenville, for instance, you can use free Wi-Fi. Well, does that free Wi-Fi allow me to access pornography sites? And as a parent, do I want any child walking down the street to have access to that? You know, we need to ask and find out, and ask our cities or whomever is providing the free Wi-Fi to filter out the pornographic sites. We know that this can be done because several national chains have done this. McDonald's is one. They got in a lot of trouble because people were sitting in McDonald's watching pornography and children could see it. And so they, after an outcry, have filtered out pornography from their restaurants. Something that speaking again just about this internet provider service, something that another country has done, the UK, has actually gone to what I've sort of described here in individual areas. They've done it as a country. They have said that internet service providers, when they provide the service, they should filter out pornographic sites, and that if adults want to opt in and be able to access pornographic sites, then they can prove their age and opt in, you know, so that the pornography would no longer be filtered from their service. And so that's something that I find really intriguing and wonder if there would be a way to do that here in the US. So this would not deny adults who want to watch pornography from being able to get it, but it would prevent the accidental access to our young people of being able to either accidentally or on purpose access pornography. So that's an idea that I think is definitely worth investigating. Something that, again, on a broader level, and I mentioned this earlier, I said that the only type of pornography that's being prosecuted in the U.S. are child sexual abuse images. That any pornography that involves someone 18 or older is never even investigated. And so that's something that if you think that should be changed, I strongly encourage you to write to your congressmen and your senators about that. That has been the case at the federal level for the last several administrations. The Department of Justice has not prosecuted the federal obscenity laws that we have here in the U.S. And so if that is something that you would like to see changed, then I strongly encourage you to use your voice to do that. One last thing that I'll mention in terms of reducing access, I've mentioned a couple of times as we've talked this organization called Pornhub. And so they've gotten into quite a bit of trouble because I mentioned that basically anybody can upload this amateur porn. And many times people are uploading images and they do not have the permission of the person in the images to upload it. In many cases, it's actually been in video of a rape or a sexual assault, or it's been, as I mentioned, revenge porn, that kind of thing. And when the victim has contacted Pornhub and said, look, you know, I'm a minor and you've got an image of me being raped on your website, I want it taken down, they've refused. So there is a petition online to get Pornhub closed down. And so if that's something that you have an opinion on, the organization that you would go to is called Trafficking Hub. And they have a petition that you can sign if you have an opinion about that. Before we go to the next section, are there any questions, Melinda?
You actually have quite a bit.
Well, we may not be able to get to all of them then, but we'll try to get a couple.
Is the here's one. Is the level of trafficking directly related to the increase in internet pornography use? If so, then why?
Is trafficking directly related to the increase in internet pornography? If
Yes.
so, why? Well, we talked about how people who watch pornography often, there often is a progression of that person needing more and stronger images to get the same effect. And of course, the idea of porn addiction is something that we're going to talk about in quite a bit of depth in this other webinar that I mentioned. So they may not be able to, they may want to experience the acts that are portrayed in those images in their own sex life. And the people that their spouse or their partner may be unwilling because the acts that they're watching are so violent or so degrading that the partner or wife is unwilling to participate in that. And so the person may then choose to buy sex from someone who is not allowed to say no and has to act like they enjoy it. So when you ask, has trafficking increased? I mean, the amount of pornography that is accessible to the general public has exploded exponentially with the advent of internet pornography. I mean, just the availability of it is absolutely incredible. So sheer volume, I think, would support the idea that there would be an increase in demand for sex trafficking victims.
And if I may, Pam, this person's actually who asked this question is in the UK, and I don't know if it applies to that country or the area in which that person's living in. But I found it very interesting that when Polaris released their numbers that in North Carolina, I think it was the second or the third industry involving sex trafficking was pornography.
Mm-hmm.
That was the recent numbers. So in Polaris, of course, when we talk about numbers, it's always but. But I just wanted to point that out as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And you have another question. How does a person talk to their friend whose husband is a frequent porn watcher, and talk about how do they address that with them?
That is so hard. That is so hard. And when you begin to read stories from people whose spouse are regular porn users, that person, spouse or partner, that person generally feels the same sense of betrayal and hurt and anger that someone whose partner has been involved in a physical sexual affair, because not only, and usually in an affair, there's one person that your spouse is cheating on you with, but when you're talking about pornography, it's multiple people, and that sense of betrayal, but then also that sense of not being enough. That it's just incredibly painful, and I would suggesting to the friend to consider getting counseling. Best case would be the person and her husband who's watching the porn to get counseling together, if he's willing. If he considers that it's a problem, and hopefully even if he didn't think the porn itself was a problem, he would think that the way that it's affecting his wife is a problem. So that counseling together would be best case. But even if he refuses to go, I think it could be really valuable for the wife in that situation to get some counseling, to understand it's not her fault. It's got nothing to do with her, that it's not her being less than. When someone's watching pornography, it's all about what's going on in their head. It doesn't have anything to do with you.
That's all the questions for now.
That's it. All right. Well, we have talked about this is sort of a leftover from our last section. I apologize. I didn't flip the slide. So at the end, I was saying that we could contact our legislators and express our concern. This is, excuse me, a picture of me talking with a local representative, a North Carolina representative, Dr. Perrin Jones, who has expressed interest in supporting anti-human trafficking legislation here in North Carolina. And this other picture in front of the Capitol, somewhere in that picture are Melinda and me. I cannot direct you to us, but last summer we attended a conference and had the opportunity to go to Capitol Hill and actually lobby for the idea of porn being a public health crisis, and for legislation that would protect young people from pornography. And this is the slide about Pornhub that I just mentioned, the petition that you can sign if you're interested. And so that brings us to the third thing. The third way that we can help is to provide resources for those who want to stop consuming porn. So when you first become aware that someone is using porn, tell them you want to help. Don't get angry. Don't be judgmental, because shaming is not effective. There are tons of resources available to help people stop using pornography. And here are a few of them. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation, that's actually the conference we went to that I just alluded to. They have a lot of research on pornography and how it affects people. They also have a list of resources for people who are trying to stop using pornography. I already mentioned Fight the New Drug. They also have a specific program to help people stop using porn. It's called Fortify, and it's free. XXXchurch.com is very, it's an online support group, very non-judgmental, willing to help with accountability and have accountability groups if you're interested in that. Covenant Eyes also has accountability groups. They have specific software. I think it's a really interesting way of doing it, and I think could be helpful to some people. They have software so that if you're someone who's trying to stop using porn and you access something that you shouldn't be, it will send an email or a text to your accountability partner that you're accessing that, and so that person can call you and talk you down or ask you what's going on and can support you. So just the mere fact that that text or that email is going to go out hopefully will be a deterrent, but then if you still do it, then you'll have a support person there to help you and talk with you. The last one is Celebrate Recovery, and that is normally an in-person group that meets at churches, and so that is a Christian group. It's a 12-step program, sort of similar to the AA program. So there are tons of other resources out there, y'all, but these are just a few that I happen to be familiar with. If you know of others that you'd like to share, please put it in the chat or shoot us an email. We'd love to know about it. So we have covered an awful lot today. You've learned how pornography is related to sex trafficking. You've learned about porn being a business model and what a huge business it is. And most importantly, you've learned how you can play a part in reducing the consumption of pornography. You have the power to change our culture. Will you choose to join the anti-human trafficking movement and reduce access to pornography? With that, I am going to open it up again to questions. I do want to ask you, Melinda, in case there are people who have to leave us before all the questions get answered, if you would go ahead and put the post survey in the chat box for us, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Okay, right now I'm not seeing any questions, but we're still here to answer any. So, and the post survey has been put in the chat box. If all the participants could fill it out and tell us how much you've learned, but also we really want your opinions about this presentation. We always like to do better. So,
yes,
and we also like compliments as well. So don't forget that.
This is only the second time that we've done this webinar, so we are definitely open to suggestions for improvement. I see someone had commented here about the documentary Hot Girls Wanted. I thought that was really interesting too. That's a good recommendation. It was really heartbreaking how those girls got recruited into pornography and then were introduced to a lifestyle that required a lot of money, but it showed how girls don't last very long in pornography. They get used up pretty quickly, and they can't maintain that lifestyle. It was really quite a heartbreaking documentary, I thought. Is there, are there any other, oh, I see something under Q&A here. Let's see. Okay, great.
There is an art therapist in the group, and she wants to know how she can become more involved.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to talking with you more and learning where you are, and if we can become, if we can partner together on some things, that would be really good. I do know a good number of service providers, so could perhaps connect you to some of them if you would like to work with some victim survivors of human trafficking. So hopefully we can talk more offline. I do want to mention again that we do have in a few weeks coming up a webinar about, more specifically about the harms that pornography causes to individuals. We'll be talking about drug addiction, about the harm it causes to relationships, and the harm it causes to society overall. And so we'll certainly have a link when we send you a follow-up that has this recording and has the slides from this presentation. We'll send you a link so that you could sign up for that if you like. If you don't, if you signed up for this because you thought the topic sounded interesting, but maybe you don't really know a whole lot about the general issue of human trafficking, we've got a Human Trafficking 101 coming up in early July. So there may be some other webinars that you would be interested in as well.
One person would like to know if there are any conferences around the country that are inexpensive about pornography and human trafficking. I know the Nicosi conference is virtual and free, so.
Yeah, tell her about it.
Oh, well, then, sorry. The Nicosi, or the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, it went virtual due to the pandemic, but it is actually, you can actually register online to attend that conference, and they have about 100 speakers, and it's completely free right now to do that. So it's a good opportunity for you to learn more about pornography or human trafficking. I mean, they cover the whole array of sexual exploitation. So it's not going to just be it's not just going to be limited to pornography and human trafficking. It's going to include commercial sexual exploitation of children, and it's the whole gamut, really. And I will have that, we'll add that link to the conference in our follow-up email.
And we will send you the future webinars as well. Someone asked about that also. Another conference that you all might consider is the Shared Hope International Conference that's in November. Currently, they are still planning to have that be a live in-person conference. It's going to be in DC the first week in November. So it's called JUST, J-U-S-T conference. And you can go to sharedhope.org and get more information about that. I have attended both the conference that Melinda mentioned. I've been to that one in person twice, and it was phenomenal. And I've been to the Shared Hope International one. And something that both of them do really well, I think, is they have survivors giving a lot of the workshops and serving as speakers. And you just get such an incredible perspective from someone who's actually been through it, which is why, of course, I try to share a couple of videos with you today from people who've been through it. And when I didn't have a video, I shared their story verbally.
I would like to point out, Pam, that someone's have found ways, it's in the chat box, found ways to take some of the emails that we have sent out in our weekly newsletter and to talk to their daughter and 16-year-old son about these issues. And I want to let all the attendees know that you will be signed up for our newsletter. If you don't want to be, I think it's an amazing newsletter, but if you don't want to be, that's okay. You can always unsubscribe when you scroll down to the bottom. Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, I'm going to ask Melinda to put that, the links, well, maybe put it in there one more time to the post survey. Please fill that out. It helps us so much. It also helps us be able to report back to our funders how many people attend our trainings and what our evaluations are. So that's a big help. And if there are no other questions, I'm going to end us. Thank y'all so much for coming, and I hope that you will be with us on a future webinar. Have a great day.